Britain's Liberals love dunking on Richard Bergen. Now, maybe sometimes they have a point. Like any public figure, he's given the odd bad interview. We all have. However, more often than not, something else is going on. They attack Bergen because he's one of the few politicians willing to speak outside of acceptable opinion among the British establishment. There was a perfect example of this earlier this week. So Adam Langleyban is a former Labour councillor. He shared a clip of Richard Bergen on LBC with the caption, "This is an astonishing watch on Ian Dale's show tonight." He then went on to sort of point to articles which were saying the Soviet Union was wonderful. And it was shared by all of Britain's leading liberals on Twitter saying, "What the hell is Richard Bergen doing? What an idiot." I think they were wrong. Let's take a look at the clip. We're going to talk about it.
Richard Bergen, it's one of those things where those policies where it's not really a party political thing, isn't it? It's something where there ought to be unity on both sides of the house on how we deal with the threats that are coming from China.
Well, first of all, and I'm sure that Tim didn't mean it in this way, but I think things can be said which accidentally have a damaging impact. When he was saying that China has tentacles all over, 30% of students on campuses and the rest of it, I think we've got to be very careful that where our government has disagreements with the government of China, that this doesn't end up fueling anti-Chinese racism in our society. People,
that's not what it's about.
But people,
and that's the Chinese government. That's what they'd like you to believe. This is not about being anti-China. This is not an argument with China. It's an argument with the Chinese Communist Party government.
I'm saying...
Don't fall into their trap, Richard. That's their narrative.
There is an increased instance of racism faced by Chinese people in Britain, for example, in relation to COVID. And we've got to guard against that. But what I'd say more widely is, look, there's things that the government of the United States has done historically, which we profoundly disagree with, invading other countries, using a nuclear bomb.
Not committing genocide against millions of their own people, not responsible for the deaths of 1 million Chinese citizens who happen to be Tibetan. This is on an altogether different scale. Let's not try and call them in the same terms as America.
I was referring to the only use of a nuclear weapon in war against civilian populations and the invasion, and
in peacetime, the Chinese
and the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan. So
I don't really agree just to draw comparisons between the United States and China.
Why can't we draw comparisons between countries? That's all he was doing. It's a completely reasonable thing to do. Now, that claim about 1 million Tibetans, I asked on Twitter where that was from. I'm still unsure. We're going to talk about this genocide issue in a moment, so I want to park that. What I just wanted to mention from that part, we're going to watch the rest of the clip, is Richard Bergen made such a reasonable point, right? Which is that you shouldn't really talk about China having tentacles all around the world at the same time as talking about international students, because that's clearly the kind of language which is going to incite hatred. And I think most people would recognize that if we were talking about Israel. If you said Israel has all of these tentacles around the world, we say, no, you shouldn't say that. You could talk about the influence it has around the world, but don't use terms like tentacles. That's all Richard Bergen was saying. And then that Tory MP says to him, you're just using the arguments of the CCP. And no one intervenes on Richard Bergen's side. No, they intervene to pile in on the side of the Tory MP. And that piling in continues. Let's look at the next part of this exchange.
The point I want to make, however...
Everything you've said, you could say in the States, you couldn't say in China. Anything I've said...
The point I want to make is that, of course, we need our government to speak up for human rights around the world. Of course, we need our government to speak, including to its allies, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, about the human rights abuses there. But I think we need to avoid a rush into a new Cold War, because Cold Wars can become proxy wars, hot wars. That's not in the interest of anybody. And of course, our government will have disagreements with the government of China. But when it comes to climate change, for example, we do need to be working with China in relation to averting climate catastrophe. And you look, for example, at the huge refugee crises that are going to be caused because of climate catastrophe. There's going to be a need for more international cooperation when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the flow of refugees, and a whole host of other issues, diminishing resources. And that means working with governments in other countries who we have profound disagreements with on other issues.
In your answer there, I haven't heard one single condemnation of anything the Chinese government has done.
Including on the environment. 29% of greenhouse gases are produced by China, way and above any other nation. The last 11 years, they've burnt more coal than the whole of the rest of the world put together. They are going the wrong way on climate change. We need to call them out, not say, we need to sit down and be nice to them. We need to make sure we're not buying goods from them that have been produced in environmentally unfriendly ways or by slave labor. So call them out, not our allies in America and elsewhere.
Action is needed from China and from the United States and from the UK on climate change. However, there is a line which is incorrect, that somehow people believe that per head of the population in China, their carbon footprint is greater than ours. That's not true. The average person in China has a smaller...
Stop defending
I'm not.
We need
to have a sense.
Now, that bit was just, and as I said, the important thing to caveat here is liberals are all tweeting and saying, what was Richard Bergen doing? They're all praising Tim Loughton, this Conservative MP. What happened in that exchange? Richard Bergen says, actually, when it comes to climate change, we should look at per capita emissions, not the total emissions of a country, because obviously if a country has 1.4 billion people, then if it has more emissions than a country with 60 million people, that's not a surprise. That's to be expected. Tim Loughton, in response, says, stop defending China. It's just impossible to have a reasonable conversation about China and policy in China, because the moment you say something remotely sensible, which could be seen to undermine an attack on China, suddenly you are pro-China, you're a CCP stooge. And what's also important, what's the most important thing here, as well as the liberals all sharing this, saying, Richard Bergen's such an idiot, Tim Loughton so amazing, is Ian Dale always intervenes to say, Richard Bergen, why won't you condemn China? He never intervenes to say, Tim Loughton, all he's saying is we should look at per capita emissions, not total emissions. Don't you think that's reasonable? No. He piles in with the Conservative there because Richard Bergen has said something which is outside acceptable opinion in the establishment. The next part of the clip is the most controversial one. This is what the stories about this led with and the thing that LBC tried to make a big deal out of. Let's take a look at the end of this clip.
China is a superpower. Of course, there'll be things on which we profoundly disagree with them. Of course, our government has to hold its allies and other countries to account on human rights abuses, and those discussions need to take place.
Do you believe they've committed genocide?
But see,
do you believe they've committed genocide?
The approach you're taking
is to ask you if you believe they committed genocide.
The approach that you're taking is
it's a straight question.
You're trying to basically create a political storm. Let me speak if that's okay.
You agree with the House let me speak that genocide has been committed by the Chinese.
I'm saying that our government needs to hold other governments around the world, yes, including China, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, to account on human rights abuses. But we inevitably need a relationship.
Why do you find it so difficult to utter one word of condemnation about anything to do with China? I find it astonishing.
Richard Bergen kept saying we should be tough on China when they abuse human rights. I mean, he wasn't exactly saying, no, China's amazing, it's wonderful. And it was that question about genocide, which has sort of sent all the liberals wild. And LBC actually put out, I think, quite a cynical headline alongside this clip saying, Labour MP refuses, in capital letters, 6 times to condemn China for Uyghur genocide. Now, it's important to say he wasn't asked to condemn what was going on in Xinjiang. He was asked, is it a genocide? Now, I'm not an expert either on Xinjiang or genocide, but what I do know is that there are lots of very smart, very intelligent people who think that while terrible things are going on there and human rights abuses are being, made on a mass scale, it doesn't qualify as genocide because genocide is about the destruction of a people. In common understanding, what it means is you're trying to wipe out a people. You're instituting mass death. Now, what is happening in Xinjiang, as far as I understand it, is that lots of people are being forcibly put in camps. It's not a nice thing to do. That is an abuse of human rights, but there is no intention, and they're not killing people, essentially, or they're definitely not intending to wipe out a people, to destroy a people. Doesn't mean it's fine, but on most understandings, is it a genocide? I'm not sure. Human Rights Watch haven't called it a genocide. They've done a big report on all of the human rights abuses taking place. They haven't called it a genocide. Amnesty International, exactly the same. The UN haven't. The Economist did a very interesting article saying, look, what's going on in Xinjiang is bad, but it's not a genocide. Richard Bergen now on the radio is asked, is it a genocide? Is it a genocide? Is it a genocide? He doesn't confirm yes or no. He's probably not sure either. And suddenly, this now becomes, he's a genocide denier. And also what I found ridiculous is the Tory MP says that the House of Commons called it a genocide. Since when does the House of Commons... The House of Commons is not a leading authority on human rights. Disagreeing with the House of Commons on what is going on in another country should not be outside the bounds of respectable opinion.
Let's wind this back. How did this start? Richard Bergen says that we should be worried about the kind of language people are using with regards to China because anti-Asian attacks are rising. Very recently, we found out that online hate speech towards Asians, I think in the UK, had risen 1,600% in 2019, 2020 because of COVID. So he's right. First of all, he's right about that point. And then, of course, that's pushed back and said, well, you're right, but that's the line of the CCP. Well, it doesn't matter if it's the line of the CCP. How does Tim Loughton know that, of all people? It's true. It's accurate. It's facts. Let's not do fake news and spin. It's a fact. And especially for British Asians, that's a hugely important issue, which shouldn't just be ignored by one of the two major parties or by a major media outlet like the LBC. And somehow we've gone from a Labour politician saying we shouldn't allow language which demonizes certain minorities to infect our political discourse. We've gone from that to, you deny genocide. Well, first of all, like you say, Michael, there are, I think it's inarguable, quite major civil liberties compromises happening in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is effectively a frontier province of China. There's been a history of mass displacement, ethnic cleansing in the 18th century, actually, as it was integrated into the Chinese polity. So we can have that as a conversation, perhaps. But actually, it's in terms of it being disputed or not, you've got lawyers from the State Department, Michael, saying it doesn't qualify as a genocide. You've got the Economist. So if somebody says that and they're reasonably informed, they say, well, I don't know the scale of it, but these are pretty eminent sources. And they will sort of indicate we shouldn't jump to conclusions about this. Again, I thought we were meant to be in a world where it's facts over feelings. The worst people when it comes to this, Michael, is legacy media. Ian Dale, a failed Tory parliamentary candidate, might I add, not just some indifferent objective pundit. No, my God, it's like watching WrestleMania and 4 people gang up on one guy. So I did feel sorry for Richard Bergen because on the stats, on the facts, he was not wrong. On climate change, China is a failure on climate change. They produce, and it's true, they produce 30% of the world's CO2 emissions. It's 1.4 billion people. But on a per head basis, Chinese emissions are about, to the best of my recollection, it's about a third of what it is in the US and Canada or Australia. So this is a ridiculous thing to say. And if you, again, reply with facts, with statistics, well, sorry, my friend, in legacy media world, they don't matter. What matters is feelings. Oh, well, now you're saying facts. Why are you defending the Chinese Communist Party? China has more solar and wind capacity than the US, than the EU. It's going to grow its solar and wind capacity. It's accelerating. I think it's got more solar than the US and the EU combined. I wrote an article about this for Novara Media. There's been reforestation over the last 30 years to such an extent that it's now visible from space. Almost all of that has been done by China and India. Now, tree planting, as we said time and time again, has its downsides, complicated. You can't just plant any tree anywhere. But that's far more than what we've seen from the US and from the European Union. So, yes, China is a leader on climate change. What does that tell us? It tells us two things. The rest of the world isn't doing very much, particularly the Anglophone countries, particularly Australia, the US, Canada. My God, Australia doesn't have a single kilometre of high-speed rail. China has 37,000 kilometres, right? Which country do you think is doing more to get rid of internal aviation, which is incredibly intense when it comes, and shouldn't be happening, when it comes to fossil fuels and climate emissions? Clearly on this, China is a climate leader. How dare you defend Beijing, Aaron Bastani? So let's have an adult debate. The problem is we can't, Michael. We can't, because of these dull, uninformed, incurious, cantankerous old men which have strangulated and asphyxiated and contorted British civil society out of all recognition.